Welcome everyone to the Pierce Conservation District's 2024 Soil Health and Pasture Fertility webinar. We are so excited to have you all here tonight to talk about the importance of soil health and how to use soil health tests and guide fertilizer application. My name is Katie Nelson and I am the Farm and Habitat Specialist for Pierce Conservation District. I will be monitoring the chat this evening and providing any technical assistance if needed. We're going to have two Q&A periods that will be open after our two talks, so feel free to either unmute or type in the chat during this time. A recording of this webinar will also be posted to our website. I'll link the website in the chat. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from Paul Borne, the Farm Resource Manager from Pierce Conservation District, and Brandon Wilhelm, an agronomist from Wilbur-Ellis. I'm going to do a quick land acknowledgement before we get started. We acknowledge that the land now identified as Pierce County has been used thousands of years for the traditional territory and home for the Puyallup, Nisqually, Squaxin, and Muckleshoot people. Today, this land is still home to these 4 federally recognized tribes. We recognize them as past, present, and future guardians of this land, both culturally and legally, as evidenced by the respective treaties. We acknowledge these tribal governments and their respective roles today in providing and taking care of the lands and resources. We will commit to working together in the stewardship of their homeland where we mutually work and reside. We further recognize that land acknowledgements are not a new practice, and they are an indigenous practice that honors the land and the people who have stewarded it since time immemorial. For more information on what a land acknowledgement is and how to properly share one, visit the Puyallup Tribe page on land acknowledgements. I will link the website in the chat, and I'm going to pass it on to Paul.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on soil health and pasture fertility. As we get started, it's always interesting to us, where you are, where your property is, what you're raising. So if you want to put any of that information in the chat, that would be great. And I think I'll go ahead and start my screen share. Is that okay, Katie?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about soil health, and pasture fertility. And I love dad jokes, so I'm going to tell my only soil dad joke. Does anyone know the difference between dirt and soil? Well, dirt is what your mom used to clean from behind your ears, and soil is what we have under our feet that grows our crops. All right. Well, let's get started. So Katie and I both work here at the Pierce Conservation District. And you're going to tell us about yourself as we move along here. So Pierce Conservation District, we've been around since, for about 70 years. And conservation districts started during the Dust Bowl era. So conservation districts, what do? We're a non-regulatory agency. We're not here to enforce any regulations or turn you in. We're here to work with you. Your participation, your work with us is voluntary. We provide educational, technical, and financial assistance to landowners, land renters, cooperators who are working the soil. And our goal is just to help you protect and restore the natural resources on your property and neighboring your property. So these are our basic core programs here at Pierce Conservation District. Farm planning and ag assistance is what I do. We work with livestock owners, crop owners, orchardists to provide resource information. We have a robust environmental education department. We work a lot with K through 12. Children right now, we're doing a salmon in the classroom program where kids in middle school are raising salmon in tanks in their classrooms to be released in Swan Creek later this spring. We have a habitat improvement program where we're restoring riparian habitat and wetland habitat. Our water quality and green infrastructure program works on improving runoff from properties, whether that be cities, into rain gardens, or depaving concrete and asphalt surfaces, collecting using rainwater in cisterns. Our Harvest Pierce County program is very active in several communities, supporting urban agriculture. And then we also have a climate resiliency program where we're working with landowners to become fire wise and prepared for our ever increasing wildfires. So tonight we're going to talk about soil and soil health. We're going to look at what is soil composed of? What are its ingredients, its parts? We're going to talk about the structure of soil. We're going to talk about what it means for soil health. We're going to look at how to take a soil sample if you're interested in collecting one on your property. We're going to talk about other available Pierce Conservation District services and equipment. Our guest, Brandon Wilhelm, will talk about interpreting a soil test, nutrients your pasture might need, prioritizing what nutrients to apply and when, and how to calculate how much fertilizer you actually need. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of soil. It goes back many generations. Even the Greeks and the Romans, people of that era, knew about the importance of soil. So one philosopher had written a treatise on soil, and it's to be a successful farmer, one must know the nature of the soil. But that's kind of why we're here tonight. And then the father of American soil conservation, Hugh Hammond Bennett, once said, "If we take care of the land, it will take care of us." Okay, a few things to see what you know about soil. So if you take 6 inches of soil off an acre, it weighs about 2 million pounds. It takes 3,000 years to develop. That's about 500 years per inch. Contains 5,000 pounds of soil microbes, all the things you can't see. Stores water, nutrients, carbon. It's capable of holding up to 9,000 tons of water, depending on your soil type and climate conditions. So that's pretty amazing. I think I read somewhere that the width of a penny, the surface of the width of a penny over an acre weighs just, I don't know if it was 1 million pounds. No, it wouldn't make sense. Just thousands of pounds, just the depth of a penny. Okay, so soil, what is it composed of? We're digging in the ground below our feet. What are we going to find there? So the largest component of soil are mineral particles, and these are sands, silts, and clays that have weathered from rocks over thousands and thousands and millions of years. Another large portion of soil is water, about 25%. Air is another 25%. And then we have organic matter, and this can be living and dead plant parts or living and dead organisms. The parts of worms and parts of beetles you see, and all the organisms you can't see. So that's what a clod of soil is. So what are we talking about when we talk about soil structure? Well, all these particles, all those components of soil come together and create what we call aggregates. You can kind of see a good example here. This person holding a nice clump of soil under this, probably looks some sort of grass or cover crop. Okay, but soil is not just inert, dead, it's very much alive. So in most ecosystems, soil ecosystems, there's more life and diversity under the ground than above the ground. All the stuff we can't see. Soil organisms play a critical role in plant health and water dynamics. And the way we manage the land, the way we take care of it and work it really affects the organisms that live in the soil, that bring the soil alive. And here is kind of a diagram, a photo of some good soil structure and how it's created. So on the top, you see the duff layer, or the dead materials, the leaves, the dead thatch, sticks. That's the litter layer. Then you have pore spaces that hold water and air. You have earthworm and root channels that weave and go throughout the soil. You have the root zone, the areas are outside the roots. And then the stuff you can't see, the microscopic surfaces of all these particles that hold different elements and chemical compounds that are created. So soil organisms, the soil biota, they physically stabilize the soil. You have the roots that form a mesh and interweave throughout the soil particles. You've got the actual physical earthworm holes, tunnels. You have all sorts of fungal and bacteria filaments, threads that are running through the soil. And all this kind of helps create soil structures, holding the particles together, the sands, the silts, and the clays. So that's the way that soil organisms physically shape the soil. But they also chemically shape the soil. Roots, microscopic organisms are always releasing different chemicals and compounds. We've got chains of sugars, polysaccharides that help bind the soils together. There's proteins and other biochemicals that are released by the bacteria that are breaking down mineral matter or organic matter, and they're all producing chemicals that help hold the soil together. So we talked about soil composition, we've talked a little bit about structure, but when we talk about soil health, what do we mean? It used to be we would talk about soil fertility. What do I need to add to my soil to grow something? And then it was kind of more, well, what is soil productivity? Now the view has shifted more to kind of a holistic look at soil and talking about what is soil health? What makes a soil healthy? So soil, it's its capacity to continue to function as an ecosystem that will support plants, animals, and us humans who rely on those plants and animals. If a soil is healthy, it helps clean the air and water. It produces crops and forests, all sorts of grazing lands, all sorts of wildlife, and beautiful landscapes. So it's a very active, dynamic thing. And so soil does this, and we kind of can come up with 5 basic functions that soils provide to us. Okay. So, like I said, they sustain plant and animal life, and that's below ground and above ground. They can regulate and direct water flow through the soil, over the soil. It's going to store and cycle nutrients that come from the mineral matter and nutrients that come from the decaying plant and animal matter, and any nutrients we add. It really soil acts as a good buffer to filter and clean pollutants. That's why we are starting to see more and more rain gardens to be used as ways to filter runoff from streets and homes. And soil provides physical stability, whether that be for our plants or trees and crops, but also for our homes, our roads, our buildings. So those are the basic 5 functions of soil. And there's some basic principles that we stress that all of us can practice to manage soil for good health. So the first is we want to minimize disturbance of the soil. Second is we want to maximize the biodiversity in the soil. Third, we want to maximize soil cover. And fourth is we want to maximize living roots. So what do we mean by these? So disturbance can be a wide assortment of disturbances. It could be machinery, um, plows, rototillers, discs. You know, how much are we turning the soil over? When we work the soil, we damage its structure. Okay, what about our animals? If we have animals out there when the soil is saturated, these 1,000-pound animals, you know, are punching and poking the soil, they're squishing the soil, they're forcing out air and water. They have a huge effect on soil structure. And then what we're adding to the soil. If we're over applying manure or over applying fertilizers, that can actually change and disturb, you know, kind of that ecosystem balance in the soil. We want to find ways that we can minimize these types of disturbances. All right. The next principle is to maximize biodiversity. The more diverse the vegetation on top of the soil, the more diverse what's under the soil, in the soil. Different plants are associated with different fungi or microbes. They're releasing different kind of chemical compounds. You know, bringing livestock into the rotation of crops and pasture is another way to diversify the soil beneath. And then we want to maximize soil cover. We want to keep a healthy stand of grass or grass and forbs. We don't want to do what's happening here on the left, where there's very minimal vegetation, a lot of bare spots, a lot of overgrazed areas. The more we can maximize the soil cover, the more we can protect what's underneath it, whether that be from animal traffic or foot traffic, whether that's from wind erosion or rain erosion. We want to protect the soil. We also want to maximize the presence of living roots. You know, it's not just dead leaves or dead thatch that we want. You know, the active living roots that are in the ground, they're the ones that are releasing chemical compounds that are growing through the soil, that are helping form that soil structure. They're feeding the microorganisms, which in turn feed the plants. So the four basic things that we want to practice on our properties, on our farms, to improve soil structure and health are to minimize the disturbance as much as we can, maximize the biodiversity, maximize the soil cover as much as we can, and maximize the living roots. So okay, so we know a little bit about the structure, we know a little bit about the health, and the more scientists study these areas, the more, you know, it's kind of so much more to learn. But I enjoyed this comic. We ran some samples back of the lab, and yes, it is dirt. Okay, so why do we want to test our soil? Why do we want to sample the soil in our pasture or in our gardens? Well, basically, you know, if you don't know what's in the soil, if you don't know what elements and levels of nutrients are in there, you're kind of guessing when it comes time to improve the pasture or the garden. So we take a soil sample and test it to get a baseline, kind of what is there at this point in time. All right. Determining what's there, determining what's needed for what we want to grow. If we're going to grow pasture, are we going to grow vegetable crops? Are we going to raise fruit? And knowing the baseline, knowing what we want to grow, you can determine your application rates. Doing the soil test will help us assess the acidity of the soil. Our soils here are very acidic in the Northwest. So how do I bring it into a balance? And the important thing, another important point is that we can measure change over time. So You have a soil, you're analyzing at this point, and I'm working to improve it. How has it changed over 2 years, over 4 years? Something that soil testing can help us with. Okay, so if you want to take a test, a sample on your property, you can use a soil probe, a shovel, and we always need a bucket and a trowel. Okay, so what's the protocol? How are we going to take this sample? So most of us probably don't have 20 plus acres, but a single sample shouldn't be more than a piece of land that's 20 acres in size. So the parcel you're sampling, if it's up to 20 acres, you'd maybe want to take 15, 20 subsamples. If it's a 1 acre pasture, maybe you're taking 5 or 6, but you want to take a number of random samples from whatever area you're wanting to test. Usually when I'm taking a sample on a property, I'm taking it down to 6 or 8 inches. The idea is that whatever depth you choose, just stick to it from year to year. Don't year to year and sample to sample. If you're in one corner of the pasture and you do 6 inches, then you go to the middle of the pasture and you dig down 12, and then you go somewhere else and you dig down 8. You're gonna not get you may not get a representative sample when it comes to the analysis. So pick one depth, stick to it. If you're sampling year after year or every other year, try to do it at the same time of year. Different nutrients move throughout the soil column. Nitrogen leaches with rain. So if you're not taking it the same time of year, you're going to get different results. You can call us too to help if you like. We give 5 free soil tests for livestock pasture, hay fields, and commercial crops. We don't do the free soil tests for home gardens, but we can certainly give you the information and help you to learn how to take the sample and where to send it. Okay, so say this is your property. Where do you want to take a sample? Well, you want to take a sample wherever your practices are different. If you're growing crops in one section, pasture in another, blueberries in another, well, you'd want to test each of those separately. If you have one big pasture and a portion of it is high and dry and another portion of it is wet and low, well, maybe you'd want to test those differently. You can also test in a pasture if your practices are going to be different. If you're going to be if you're going to want to take 1 or 2 cuttings of hay versus just some occasional grazing, maybe you'd want to take different samples in those 2 areas. And then when you're there, this little diagram, they say, okay, well, don't take it right next to your manure bin, or this talks about a limestone road, or don't take it right next to trees or a feeding area where livestock are feeding and pooping. You want to take a random sample. So a couple of ways you can do the patterns. You can just do hodgepodge here and there. You can kind of do a zigzag pattern across the pasture. Okay, you don't need special equipment. You don't necessarily need a soil probe or an auger. You can do it with just a shovel and a bucket. So first you want to make a V-shaped hole in the ground, just a nice V-shaped hole, and put that soil to the side. Then you're going to take your shovel and cut off a 1-inch slice off one side of the hole. So then you'll have kind of like a flat pancake on your shovel. So then you're going to cut away the edges and leave a 1-inch wedge in the middle of the shovel. That's what you want to save and put into your sample bucket. So I'm going to throw away the outer parts and put that 1-inch slice in a bucket. And then I'm going to repeat in various areas of the pasture or the garden or the orchard. And you want to collect a number of subsamples. And then you're going to put those all in the bucket. You're going to mix it really well. You're going to pull out, any big rocks or pieces of root or grass that are in there. You want to just try to get as much of the mineral soil as you can. And then you're going to mix that together. You're going to take out about 2 cups, which is about 2 pounds, and that's what you're going to ship to your soil lab. So it's very easy to do with a shovel, or you can, if you have a probe or someone, you can either use one of these twist-in probes or a hammer-in probe. You're going to empty out the tubes in a bucket, take, a similar number of samples, mix it up in the bucket, and then you take a sample, get a sample bag and put in 2 cups, and that's what you mail to the lab. Okay, so here's an example. You don't need a fancy soil bag, but Ziploc baggies are great. You send those off. And if one thing I do here at the Conservation District, if I'm taking a sample and I know I'm not going to mail it or be able to mail it for a week or if it's going to sit out over a weekend, I'm going to put it in the refrigerator just to keep it cold, to keep the soil organisms more inactive. Because if it's a warm day and you've set your soil out in the sun, the bacteria and the organisms are still going to be working on the nutrients and breaking things down. So it might affect the results. So putting it in the refrigerator is a good idea. So what are we going to learn when our soil is analyzed? Well, we're going to see which elements are in short supply: nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, sulfur, calcium, magnesium. Okay, well then how much do I need to apply to bring the nutrient levels up to the level that the crops need, the pasture grass needs? All right, it'll help us decide what sort of material do I use. Do I want something that's quick release, or do I want to use something more natural and organic like manure or alfalfa meal, something that's slower to break down? How am I going to apply it? Am I going to band it in rows down a row of corn, or am I going to fling it with a manure spreader or use some sort of cone spreader off the back of a tractor? And when's the best time to apply it? If we're applying lime, we want to give the lime time to work into the soil. Same with manure. If we're applying a chemical fertilizer, then we can, it won't take as long for the chemical fertilizer to become available. And, knowing how much you need to add, you can kind of help you calculate the return on your investment. And the other key thing about using a soil test to determine what you need to add is what we call the 4R principles. You want to get the right source of nutrients, the right material, the right rate. You don't want to under apply, you don't want to over apply, because we want to protect water quality. Right time, you don't want to be applying manure in the middle of the winter when it's going to be washed away or when the plants aren't growing to utilize it. And the right place, if you're fertilizing a specific crop, maybe you want to put it right along the crop row. If it's manure in a pasture, you're going to want to broadcast it. So right source, right rate, right time, and right place. Okay, so we're going to next, Brandon Wilhelm from Wilbur-Ellis is going to talk to us a little more specifically about pasture fertility and products we can use. Before that, I just want to remind people of some of our program ways we can help you or assist you. We provide TA site visits where we can help you solve specific resource issues, whether it's mud or manure problems, lack of growth in your pasture. We can help prepare a farm plan to kind of pull together a number of these TA guidelines. We can do the soil testing. We also have equipment rental. We've got a number of recorded webinars and fact sheets on our website. There's also some how-to videos. We also have equipment that you can rent. We've got a couple of manure spreaders. We've got a lime drop spreader, hay probe for testing the nutritional value of your hay. We have some electric fencing if you're interested in trying out electric netting to rotate your animals through your pastures. We've got a couple of no-till seed drills for pasture renovation. We've got a flail mower. We've got poultry processing equipment. We also have some nose pumps if you're interested in getting your animals, if your animals are feeding directly in water, which we don't advise, we've got some nose pumps you can try. So we rent equipment that you're not likely to find at a rental company, but if you're just looking for a rototiller or a normal piece of equipment, we encourage you to go to your local rental company. One other resource I wanted to mention this evening is the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. They're our partner organization. They're kind of considered the science arm of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They have many programs to assist farmers, working lands, and one in particular that we're promoting is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So this is another program similar to some of our resource programs, but they can provide technical and financial assistance for commercial farms, whether that's a livestock farm or a crop farm. So EQIP, the program supports producers who want to improve and sustain the natural resources on their property. There are NRCS field agents who will come and meet with you and discuss the needs on your property, and they can make recommendations and also provide funding. This QR code will take you to a fact sheet that gives you more information about the EQIP. And our local NRCS office is in Puyallup. Lynn Quat is the district conservationist, and here's her contact information if any one of you is raising, livestock or crops commercially and wants some technical assistance. She'd be the one to reach out to. Thank you for following along with me. If there are any questions, I could take a couple of those now. I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Okay. All right. Well, if any of you have questions that come up, you feel free to call or email me. So now I think we'll pass it along to Brandon.
One second here, just get this. Well, good evening. I'm Brandon Wilhelm. I am with a company called Wilbur-Ellis, and I'm a sales agronomist out of the Auburn, Washington location. Um, just a quick intro about myself and or the company I work for. Like I said, I've been with Wilbur-Ellis for 5 years now. Previously, I was a production and harvest manager for a local sod farm for about 3 years. And before that, in my previous career, I was in the golf industry for about 13 years, and 5 of those as a golf course superintendent. Currently, and through the last 5 years with Wilbur, I have a very diverse portfolio of customers and currently advise and work with customers in nearly every aspect of the green industry, not just turf and ornamental. So as Paul mentioned earlier, I'm going to talk a little more about soil health and then probably focus most of the time on soil testing results, how to interpret, and what do you do once you've interpreted your soil results, and how does that affect you and your farm or property. So soil health is highly important, probably even more so being landowners or farm owners. Do you need to be an expert? No, you don't. Do you need to have a good understanding? Yes, you do. So that's kind of, why we're spending this lovely evening together, is just trying to, get some base points down, just some fundamental understanding of maybe what we need to pay attention to and maybe what we don't need to pay as much attention to still achieve our overall goals of soil health, environmental stewardship, and sustainability. So just a little breakdown of probably what we're going to talk about today. Soil health, of course, in my opinion, the most critical aspect of plant health. You're going to hear balance a lot. I know Paul referenced it several times, but balance is going to be a key phrase. It is, it's the same thing that keeps us, upright and waking up every day is a healthy balance in our lifestyle and our diet. Unfortunately, this time of year, we don't get a ton of balance in our sun intake, but hopefully that's around the corner. We're going to focus on, like I said, soil testing, what all those numbers mean on there, which ones you need to pay attention to, what you don't. Probably going to stress a lot about soil pH today. That goes along. That's a big part of the balancing equation. Talk about briefly about biology and microbe population. It's just one of those things that you need to be aware of. Paul did touch on micropopulation and how important they are to soil health and how vital they are to sustainability. CEC and soil texture is just a byproduct of these types of conversation. Most people see CEC on a soil test. One, don't know what it means. Two, there's a bunch of numbers correlated to it that don't mean anything to you unless you'll have some context, and hopefully we will answer those questions. And then another one, I think, the longer I've been in this position and the more I talk to customers and talk to growers, is the importance of carbon. Most people know that carbon is in our soil. It's all around us. It's what we're made of. It's an essential element. But again, the balance of carbon in our soils, the balance of carbon to nitrogen in our soils, carbon is the energy source. And I believe Paul mentioned it in his presentation, but over years and years and years of cultivation, and potentially overworking the soil or maybe not working the soil enough, we start to deplete that soil of natural carbon, and it's just something that we need to be conscious of. So I'm going to talk a little bit about proper cultural and mechanical practices. This is going to be pretty brief, but I mean, we can start right at the top, and this is kind of right where Paul left off, is right product, right time. That's a big one, that I stress in my everyday job. A lot of it has to do with Mother Nature. Mother Nature predicates a lot of what we do on a daily, monthly, or yearly basis, especially when it comes to growing crops. So the big thing, I'm pretty, I'm not that old, but I learned, my mentor was a very antiquated and very fundamental individual. And the first thing he ever told me when I was young was, let the plant tell you what it needs. Now, it can't always tell you that, but if you're looking, a lot of times you can tell. The other thing that may seem rudimentary is I carry around like a $5 thermometer in my truck, and ground temp can tell you a lot about what's going on or what is about to happen with the soil. So microbes, and soil biology, I don't know if dormant's the right word, but they slow down during the winter when soil temps get, below 50 degrees. But here, as we approach spring, outside of today and some snow, it kind of feels like we're already in spring. But generally, biological activity starts around 50-degree ground temp. That is ground temp, not ambient temp. So that's when you're going to start seeing weeds grow. That's where biology starts. That's where microbes start getting active. Now, grass or turf or whatever you want to call it, it starts growing about 55 degrees. So in that window between 50 and 55 ground temp is a pretty short amount of time. I would assume most of you that do have lawns have started to see, little growth spurts here and there with your yard, and it looks a little uneven because we haven't mowed it in 3 months. We're kind of right on that cusp right now. I did take some ground temps this week down in the Olympia area, and we were hovering right around 48 to 50 degrees. So in my mind, that triggers that spring is right around the corner. That means fertilizing is right around the corner. That means growth is right around the corner. And, unfortunately this year it's coming a little earlier than most. So liming is another huge cultural practice that, again, it goes hand in hand with soil testing and pH. So we'll probably get into that a little more in a few more slides. Obviously, there's the word again, balancing. So the goal of this presentation and the goal of soil testing is to achieve balance in your soil. By doing that, you're going to make the microbes happy. Your biological, your soil biology will become more efficient. That leads to, happy soil, happy roots, happy plants. So managing growth to mitigate excess thatch. Now, if someone really wanted to nerd out on me, they could probably argue with me that thatch is carbon and carbon is good, and we could go down that road. But, excessive thatch can cause a lot of issues, especially in the Northwest during the winters where we have a lot of moisture. Thatch acts as a filter, a natural filter, which in good amounts, does provide that proper filtration, but in larger amounts can act as a barrier, not only for nutrients, but also for water. So that's something that too, as far as cultural and mechanical practices go, when you are taking your soil samples, thatch layer is that top layer between the crown of the plant and where you actually see soil start. I don't have a slide on it, but in turf, we generally look for somewhere between about half an inch to an inch of thatch. That would be what we call beneficial. Anything more than an inch, that starts to become excessive, and It acts more like the crummy old sponge on your sink that takes 20 seconds to get wet instead of the brand new one. So that becomes a problem, because then it acts more as a barrier than a filter. So again, depending on what type of pasture system you do run, disking is a good way to alleviate that top layer of compaction, allowing water, nutrients to more easily penetrate the soil, with doing little disruption to the overall soil, especially if you're only affecting the top few inches. Again, not an expert on pastures or feeding grazing animals, but I am aware of how important plot rotation and paddocking is. It will allow you it allows you to better plan and time your fertilizing, depending on what type of grazing you do. The reason I put the picture up here on the left, whether or not you're continuous grazer or rotational grazer, or you have intensive rotational grazing. If you don't have enough animals to support grazing an entire acre, well, why are we fertilizing an entire acre at one time? This goes back to right product, right time. So now if we have enough animals to graze half an acre, well, let's fertilize half the acre while that's being grazed. Then we can fertilize the other half an acre. And then when it's time to move over, we have fertilized at the right time with the right product in order to have the right amount of crop growth for that next grazing rotation. So again, these are just, simple cultural practices that, depending on the size of your farm, the amount of animals, what type of grazing you want to do, what type of fertilizing, how many times a year you want to fertilize. These are all things, to take into consideration. This is where the fun starts for me. This is where I start nerding out, because I'm a huge advocate of pH. I think it's vastly overlooked. The other nutrient that I think is vastly overlooked, we'll get to in the next few slides. But why is pH so critical? So we know that we get soil tests to get pH. I mean, that is, you could ask anyone that doesn't grow or grow, why do you get a soil pH? Why do you get a test? Well, I want to see what my pH is. Well, what does pH mean? So pH is an indication of the amount of hydrogen. That's my other favorite nutrient or element. It is a reflection of how much hydrogen is contained in your soil. So that's why the H is capitalized. The H in pH is hydrogen. So pH is critical for plant health, sustainability, nutrient availability, nutrient holding, microbe activity, and about 50 other things that would not fit on the screen. So I think, when I was in 8th grade, I had a science teacher that told us to write a 1,000-page essay and turn it in the next day. And then he turned around and said, the only thing I'm going to tell you is a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this is that picture. So I can't explain this picture enough. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it tells volumes. So your pH scale is on the bottom, 4 through 10. 4, very acidic, 7, neutral, 10, very alkali. And as you can see, where the fat parts of the nutrients start lining up is around 7, maybe out to about 6. Now nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, those are your macronutrients. Those are your NPK in your fertilizer. Those are what we know as, the main growing nutrients. Now, sulfur is a byproduct of most fertilizers. Calcium would be your quote unquote lime source. Magnesium is also probably a forgotten nutrient or element that is highly important when balanced with calcium. for soil and plant health. And then we have our micros, which are iron, manganese, boron, copper, zinc, molybdenum. Again, here, this is why pH is critical, is because if we are not supplying the plant all of these nutrients, then the plant is going without those nutrients unless we are in the correct pH zone. Now, my ideal zone is about 6.3 to 6.7. I think there is a return of diminishing, or there's a diminishing return outside of 6.7, where we're getting the same amount of availability at 7, but we are investing more time, energy, money, labor in order to get there when we have the same return at about 6.7. So between this range, you turn the plant from a baby into an adult, because all of a sudden the plant now has all these nutrients available to it, and it knows it. And so you're kind of unlocking not only the soil and all the nutrients that are being bound, but you're also unlocking the plant to take these nutrients in. Now, all these, regardless if you use fertilizer or not, these are all naturally occurring in the soil. Now, they may be at smaller amounts or trace elements, but all of those are commonly found in soil. So now, if we take a soil test, and we'll look at a couple soil tests in a few minutes here. But if your soil comes back and you're a 5.5, you see how narrow those lines start getting for phosphorus and potassium and sulfur compared to where they are at about 6.5. 6.5, they're all pretty uniform in availability. Well, if we can get that soil to go from a 5.5 to a 6.5, we make every single one of those nutrients more available to the plant and readily accessible. So now in this part of the country, specifically Western Washington, we rarely deal with alkaline soils. Our soils are inherently acidic. The glacial till that was left behind many, many years ago, on top of our rain, on top of the trees that inhabited the land before us, all of that is inherently acidic, and hence most of the soil samples I do come back acidic, unless they've already been on an established cultural program with lime. So we'll jump into soil testing now. Yes, there's a lot of information on these. Is it all necessary? Yes, it is. Do we need to know what it all means? No, we don't. On the left, I've kind of put my 5 key indicators. This is what I use day in and day out when I am breaking down soil tests for customers. These 5 areas of interest, I think, paint the best picture without providing paralysis by analysis. So, and I've kind of circled each one. I apologize. Apparently my company did not pay the bill on Adobe Acrobat, and I could not put this in as a file. So, so if you do have any questions, please let me know, but I will try and elaborate as much as I can in the circled areas. So the first one is organic matter percentage. That is on, the first circle here on the left. It always just says organic matter. Here's the percentage. Right now we're at 5.4. The VH, very high. Now again, the metrics for pasture versus, let's say, residential turf probably do vary, but I think they are pretty similar. For me, an ideal organic matter percentage is generally between 1 and 4%. The majority of that is generally going to come from your thatch layer, especially, in my industry, I take about 3 to 4 inch cores. That's it. I don't go down 10, 12, 14 inches, because everything that normally is grown for turf and ornamental is grown in the top 2 to 4 inches of soil. So this can also be an indicator too of your CEC, which is cation exchange capacity. But there's also a number right here, CEC, cation exchange capacity. Now, this number right here is an indicator of your soil type. So as easy as I can put it, about 0 to 8 would be about pure sand. 9 to about 12 would be a sandy, mostly sandy loam. 13 forward, 13 to 20 would be more loam mixed in with clay. And so you can look at this and look at this and say, okay, well, if I'm mostly sand and this is still high, that means I probably have a lot of organic matter sitting on or near the surface. So next, the big one is pH. So it's right here. Soil pH. So with this sample is a 5. So if we go back and we look at pH 5, we can see, how all of these lines are skinnying out towards 5. So not ideal for macronutrient consumption. Next is the percentage of CEC or base saturation. So these are your key nutrients outside of NP and K. Well, I guess there is K, but so you have potassium, magnesium, calcium, which is a big one, hydrogen, which is a big one, and then you have sodium. So the two big ones that I look at first is hydrogen, because I know it directly relates to this number or to this number here. So the higher this percentage is, the lower this number is going to be. Ideally, we want hydrogen to be below 10%. Inversely, generally, both calcium and hydrogen, they generally share an inverse. Here, they're pretty even, but in a lot of samples that I see, if you have 65% hydrogen, you'll probably have 25 or 30% calcium. And then as the calcium goes up, this number goes down. So I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but calcium or lime, calcium carbonate, whether or not you use calpril, dolopril, dolomite, any of those liming agents, calcium is the only thing that replaces hydrogen on soil binding sites. That's why we lime. So when we apply lime, calcium goes in. It is a stronger cation than the hydrogen. It bumps the hydrogen off into, it bumps the hydrogen off into soil solution, which means it is actively floating in the soil. And then as those nutrients, or as the nutrients leach, that hydrogen goes with that soil solution that's leaching. As we lose hydrogen, pH goes up. The more calcium we have, the more hydrogen we lose, the increase in soil pH. So that is roughly how we change pH. So I have talked about hydrogen. Obviously, that's an important one to look at. Calcium, again, that's going to give you an idea of, that relationship between the calcium and hydrogen and where this needs to be. In a couple, I think in 1 or 2 more slides, I'll show the ideal nutrient levels or percentages for all of these. So you have an idea of where they should all be landing. I believe in this one, potassium is good, magnesium is good, calcium is low. We generally want that 65 to 75. Hydrogen, obviously high. We want that 0 to 10 or even 0 to 5. And then I believe the sodium's in a good range too. So on most quality soil test results or samples, you will get a recommendation from the lab. The one thing, the first red flag I'll put out there is always make sure you look at what the units of measure are. Some of them come in pounds per acre, some come in pounds per 1,000 square feet. So even with I've used the same testing facility for 5 years now, and once in a while they like to throw in a curveball and switch it up on me, and I just have to do simple conversion. But still, when I'm used to looking at pounds per thousand and they changed it to acres and I'm looking at a 9,000 number, it tends to scare me a little. So so down here, they're just going to give you simple recommendations on lime, your NPK, magnesium, and then your micros. We will get into breaking all this down in another slide, but this is just, looking at your soil test at face value and what is important and what's not. So this is the first soil sample that I guess we'll break down together. Again, there's 2 samples here. So sample 1, sample 2. I have kind of broken down those top 5 metrics on the left, so you don't have to squint and read what's in here. So first sample, 12.5% organic matter, obviously VH, very high. Second one, 6.3, VH, very high. So pH on both of them, 5.5. Your CEC is a 7 and an 8.9. So again, you're dealing with a mostly sandy soil. Hydrogen percentage is 26, which is right over here. And then your calcium is at 53.4 and 49.1. Again, here's those ideal, and I'll go back to it if you guys want to write it down. But for now, you can see calcium 65 to 75, and hydrogen we want 0 to 5. I do 0 to 10 because anything below 10 is good. So again, just as I said before, hydrogen is directly correlated to your pH. Generally, the higher the hydrogen percent, the lower the pH is going to be. So, so yeah, I mean, there are tons of other numbers on here. If you want to get in the weeds, there's plenty of resources online that'll break down every single one of these. Personally, I don't use parts per million ever in my whole life. I also don't use mega equivalents per 100 grams ever in my life. I do like to bake, but neither one of those come up. So I generally don't use them as a unit of measure. Do these all mean something? Yes, they do. But for the sake of this presentation, I truly believe that these 5 areas are, kind of the key areas that you can focus in on to provide yourself a good baseline for what your soil is doing. So again, here's that ideal cation exchange percentage. This is these numbers right here. So attached to your CEC. So these don't necessarily add up to 100, but they do generally get pretty close. So, but here are your ideal percentages for each. I will say in the 200 or so soil samples I do a year, generally potassium, sodium are both always in good ranges with our naturally occurring soil. Magnesium can, I would say it's 50-50. Most of the time it's in a good range. Sometimes it's a little deficient. And then obviously the 2 big ones that have the most change or that we look at the most are your calcium and hydrogen, sorry. And then organic matter percent, 1.5 to 4. So here's a recommendation page for that same soil test. Looks a little different than the first one, but still provides all the same info. So you have soil 1. So with this one, it's recommending 6,000 pounds of lime per acre. I prefer to break it down in 1,000 square feet. So for me, that's 137 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Your nitrogen deficiency is 140 pounds per acre, which breaks down to about 3.21 pounds. Your phosphate or phosphorus deficiency is just under a pound, and your potassium deficiency is about 2 pounds per 1,000. the reason I break it down into thousands is because all my recommendations or my recommendations in most fertilizer bags, the verbiage that they use is based on a per 1,000 square foot unit of measure. Especially for nitrogen, an ideal or the normal application for a fertilizer would see you go out at about a pound of nitrogen per 1,000. So with that said, you're looking at a soil that is deficient about 3 fertilizer applications currently. The one thing I will say, and I am going to talk out of both sides of my mouth right now, is these are just numbers on a page. These don't tell the whole story. I've been on perfectly green manicured golf greens that I could not find a single thing wrong, and we took a soil sample, and had I looked at the soil sample before, I would have told you that those 2 pictures don't match up. So a lot of it is kind of balancing what you are seeing in the field versus what these numbers are telling you. The other thing to take into consideration as well is that these numbers are for complete correction of soil. Now, I guess, the way that I would categorize complete correction would be getting to ideal numbers for each one of these and your pH being exactly a 7. Now, I don't think getting to a pH of 7 is necessarily ideal. I've already stated that. Nor do I think that you need to have 3 pounds of nitrogen available in your soil all the time. Again, it's based on what crop you're growing, what time of year. So you have to take those into consideration when looking at these recommendations. And if you need help, then obviously reach out to Paul and his team, and they can help you break those down. But again, the other thing is, if we were looking at this and said, oh, well, we need to replace this much nitrogen and this much phosphorus and this much potassium, we can't put this down through a spreader at one time. Now, unless you're going to renovate your field, there's no way that all this goes down in one lump sum. So this is where it turns into a marathon, not a sprint. And we have to chop this up and say, well, it's winter. Okay. It's been 4 or 5 months, since we had active growth. We just went through, our rainy season. It's still raining. We are at, let's say, complete soil depletion. So I generally do a lot of my soil samples in February because I like to see a completely depleted soil. That gives me a great baseline on writing fertility recommendations for an entire year. And so here, even though this was done in July, again, these are just recommendations. And if you're not planting in July, these numbers don't mean anything to you. Now, if you're planting in September, and that you're deficient in these, then the type of fertilizer that you will put down in conjunction with that growth, these numbers should be considered when choosing that fertilizer. But just because you get a soil sample back in July and it says you're deficient in all these doesn't mean you need to go out and spread fertilizer right away. Because if you're not growing anything, then you're just wasting time, money. You're not being environmentally friendly, and the fertilizer's not doing anything if you're not actively growing a crop. So, okay. So here is the first sample that we looked at. This is the actual breakdown, so it's not just a prop now. So again, organic matter percentage 5.4, pH 5, CEC 3.6, hydrogen 40.5, calcium 44. The recs or the recommendations, again, here you go, pounds per acre. So we check that off. We know what we're looking at. In this one, they are calling for 9,000 pounds of lime per acre, which is a crap load. So that works out to be about 206 pounds per thousand. Nitrogen, you're only 35 pounds per acre, so you're less than a pound. That would be, ideal. If you came back and you're only a pound deficient, that's pretty good. Phosphorus, 1.3 deficient, that's pretty good too. Because without going back to the pH scale, if this goes up, then that natural phosphorus in our ground, which we have lots of natural phosphorus in our ground, this goes away if you get the pH right. You'll never have to apply phosphorus ever again. Potassium, it's a little high in deficiency, but again, with 2 apps in a year with something that does have some potassium in it, you'll probably cut that number in half. And if you're a pound deficient, that's completely acceptable. So, so balancing soil for sustainable growth. Again, there's that word again, balancing. And I think I've touched on most of this already, but I think it's good to say it again. Once the soil pH is in that ideal window, that, kind of 6.3 to 6.7, the nutrient deficiencies and the nutrient deficiencies have been addressed. So with your fertility program, the soil will essentially unlock itself. What that means is that just like in that pH chart that I showed a couple times already, once we get into that zone, everything that's already in the soil that has been bound up by the acidity of the soil, all of a sudden becomes available to the soil. So that's what I mean by unlocking. Now, are there going to be massive amounts of nitrogen and all those micronutrients? No. Is there enough to sustain life? Absolutely. And it could be just that little extra that your plant needs to grow an extra foot, or to last an extra month, or to get through a severe drought, or whatever it is, because those nutrients are readily available that we don't need to go out and apply so that they can be available to the plant. So the plant starts working for itself. It's mining for these nutrients. It's building roots because now it knows those nutrients are there, to go find those nutrients, to go find the water that's deeper down. Ultimately, we want as deep a roots as we possibly can get. And so once you put the plant in that place, it's able to then work on its own, and it's not being reliant on food and water from you. The soil nutrient bank becomes unlocked as well. As I said, all of that is now available to the plant. Plant health, vigor, growth, yield, all go up exponentially. And abiotic stresses, that could be nutrient, drought, heat, all those should subside or minimize when you have a soil pH in the correct zone and your plant health is operating at an optimal level. Quick, I guess quick refresh, or maybe this is brand new for a lot of you, just on how to calculate fertilizer application rates. I have two examples here. The first being a very commonly used fertilizer in the ag space, which is urea 4600. It is what most every synthetic fertilizer is derived from in one way or another. It is categorized as a quick release source. Generally, urea breaks down, at proper ground temp with proper moisture in between 3 and 7 days, and generally only has a residual of about 3 weeks. So that would be considered quick release. Slow release, generally we're seeing residuals for 60 plus days, depending on what type of slow release mechanism are in the blend. So So a very standard application rate, again, there's two ways to talk about it. You can either talk about pounds of N or pounds of fertilizer. So I prefer to talk about pounds of N, and then that leads us to pounds of fertilizer. So if we're saying that we would like to apply 1 pound of nitrogen, urea, per 1,000 square feet, how do we get there? So the 1 is indicative of the 1 pound that we are trying to achieve in the nitrogen. If we divide that by 46, or the decimal equivalent of 46, so 0.46, that gives us 2.17 pounds of fertilizer we need to apply to achieve 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Now, if you prefer to hear it in acres, you take 2.17, you times by 43.56, which is 43,560 down into tenths, and you get 94.5 pounds of 4600 per acre in order to achieve 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet across the entire acre. So example 2 would be triple 16, another very commonly used fertilizer in the ag space and in the turf and ornamental space as well. It's a 1-to-1 balanced NPK ratio. Also, normally sold as what they call a starter fertilizer. So let's say we decided that it's either early spring or late fall, and we don't think we have enough, there's not enough growing days to support a pound of N. So let's say we're just going to back it down a little bit to 3/4 of a pound of N per 1,000 square feet. Let's say it's maybe late October. We know maybe we only have a month of growth left. We don't want to put any extra fertilizer out that the plant is not going to use. So we're going to pare down the nitrogen a little. So again, same thing. Instead of the 1, we're going to use 0.75. We're going to divide that by the decimal of 16.16. That's going to give you 4.68 pounds of fertilizer per 1,000 square feet to achieve 3/4 of a pound of N. And for you that like it in acres, that's 4.68 pounds times 43.56 equals 203.86 pounds, or 204 pounds per acre, in order to achieve 3/4 of a pound of N across your desired field. And with that, I won't take up any more of your time or your evening. I appreciate you spending the time with us. And if anyone has any questions, we can take a few of those right now, or if you're ready to have a late dinner, you can email Paul, and we can get your questions answered at a later date. Thank you.
That was great, Brandon. I was taking notes. It's like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. Always good to hear it in a different way.
Yeah, anyone feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself if you have any questions. I think we'll just give a couple moments if any folks have any remaining questions.
I have a question. Can you hear me? When should we in the Northwest, and specifically this year, be applying lime or any of these other fertilizers?
You want me to take that, Paul?
Yeah.
So going back to the very beginning, when I talked about soil temp or ground temp, so both lime and fertilizer need microbial and biological activity to be active in order for them to break down. So we want to make sure that, with lime, we can apply a little early, because it is, it's going to sit there, but eventually it will break down. With fertilizer, we'd like to be a little more accurate with our timing, just because, especially depending on the nitrogen source, it can break down and be leached out before it is available to the plant or before the plant starts growing. So again, just like I said, I mean, if you don't have a spare thermometer, go buy a little cheap $5 one, stick it in the ground. Once you start hitting about 55 degrees, activity has started. And that would be the start of when both fertilizer and lime could be put down. Just because it says 55 doesn't mean it's the correct time for you, but it does mean that there is activity in the soil. The soil is waking up, and it does have the energy to start breaking down both the lime and whatever fertilizer you choose.
Thank you. I guess I'll go again. I have
Fire
another
away.
question.
Fire away.
What about seeding with pasture grass? I've got areas that I'd like to reseed. When should I do it?
Again, it's, obviously the earlier the better, but too early can be too early. You kind of have to read the weather. For those of us who have lived in Washington most of our lives, we've kind of understand, spring is not truly spring until like June. Um, and from one year to the next, I mean, this year it looks like we're probably going to have an early spring. But Mother Nature's fooled us before and dropped 6 inches of snow in March. Um, so again, it's just kind of about reading the weather. Again, with seed, in the most crucial aspect of seeding is that once the seed hits the ground, it needs to stay wet until it germinates. If it dries out at all, it dies. So, there is a balancing act whether or not you're going to rely on Mother Nature to help solve that problem, or if you have irrigation, obviously then you can play Mother Nature yourself and just make sure that that the seed is staying wet until it does germinate. But that is the ultimate consideration. Obviously, the higher the ground temp, and the more sunlight we have, the quicker things grow. So generally, I mean, for me, rule of thumb is May and September. I mean, those are probably the two most ideal months that we have out of the year, sometimes June. If you can't grow anything in September in Washington, you probably shouldn't be growing anything. So, but for when I am recommending putting seed down, it could be as early as middle of April, depending on the year. Generally, May is a good rule of thumb for pasture. And if you're growing, obviously for grazing for feed, you're going to be riding that line pretty tight, because you want to get it in the ground early enough that allows it to germinate and start growing to a point where it's ready for grazing or for feed, in a certain amount of time. But if you put it down too early, you could lose the seed. If you put it down too late, you might be pushing your feeding window back. So again, you kind of have to play meteorologist a little. I use the Farmer's Almanac just as a reference, from what I'm seeing. It's still amazing how correct sometimes that book is.
Yep.
But yeah, it's kind of, for us, especially in the spring, it could be, like I said, it could be as early as April 1, it could be as late as middle of May, but I would say rule of thumb, somewhere between probably middle of April and early May, you should be good.
Thank you.
Well, great. I know that I often don't have a question until I'm brushing my teeth at night or and then the shower. So like Brandon said, if you end up in the next couple of days having some questions or down the line, you can email me and if I can't answer the question myself, then I can get some more help from Brandon or my manager, Renee, or someone else on the ag team here.
Yeah, thank you, Paul and Brandon. I think if there's no further questions, we're going to start wrapping up tonight's webinar, but I just want to say a huge thank you to our speakers tonight and also everyone attending. Just a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available on our website, so if there's anything you want to rewatch or share, feel free to do that. Also, be sure to sign up for our monthly farm newsletter where we post upcoming events, funding opportunities, and lots of other cool stuff that you don't want to miss out on. I'll leave a link to the sign up in the chat right now. And yeah, again, thank you so much for everyone attending and have a good night.
Good night. Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.